Peace, peace, peace. I am Philip Roundtree, and you are tuned into the July 8th edition of Rhetorically Speaking. Props to those of you who have come and gone. Is it come and gone or came and gone? I don't know. But we, my English not proper right now. Thanks to y'all who have come and gone on IG, as y'all said, and wait for me to get started. I definitely appreciate you. As always, make sure you go on to YouTube or Facebook at PhilMSW so you can see all the little bells and whistles that I got popping over here on this live stream. Definitely salute to those of you watching on Facebook Live and YouTube Live. Make sure you hit that share button just because, I don't know, you and your folk might enjoy the conversation. I might give you some things that'll make you say, I think was that a rap song back in like '92? My old head Court was on there for a minute. Things that make you go, I know that's his era, right? I'm 37. I know you got to be at least 42 to be able to appreciate that. And as always, make sure you hit that subscribe button if you are watching on YouTube. So listen, got a dope show for you today. I didn't even know if I was going to come on tonight. This is my third night of the week, which is probably the most I've done in about 6 months. I think I'm figuring out a way to do this show thing, and because I enjoy it, right? And so we need to do more of the things that we enjoy in life. And so this is what we call balance. I got the school thing, I got the full-time entrepreneur thing popping off, but I got this too, right? And I enjoy doing this. I enjoy having these thoughtful conversations. Shout out to Keaton Nichols. I talked about him on Monday after my show was about to go off, because he has a show that comes on at 8, a nickel's worth. Let me know how they can get to it on Facebook, Keaton, so I can let the people know. Again, it's another brother. If you were listening last year, and we probably overdue for another collab, but if you were listening last year, we had a dope show where we came together. I think our styles are a little bit different, and it made it extremely entertaining. I'm sure it's a radio station somewhere that want to pick both of us up. You know what I mean? But yeah, definitely let me know, Keaton. So again, like I said, I didn't know if I was going to do a show tonight, but my homegirl hit me up and she was like, Phil, what do you think about this? Do you think, she was talking specifically about Philly, she was like, do you think community anti-violence events geared specifically towards gun violence is antiquated? And she sent me a link to some events that were taking place here in Philly. Real quick, Facebook.com is Keaton, Keaton .d.Nichols, Nichols. So you can search him on Facebook. Again, another dope brother doing dope things. We try to get it out the mud. Right, getting it out the mud. We did the radio. We actually were at the same radio station at different points. WURD, shout to them for bringing me up out of nowhere. Because again, I wasn't expecting that. I was just trying to get on the weekend show, and I was going to pay to play. Next thing I know, I had a couple months worth of doing the show, and I realized I enjoy it. I realized I enjoyed talking to the people because, as I always say, critical thinking is lacking in these streets, especially in these social media streets. People aren't thinking at levels that could either institute any type of change, and not only in their lives but societal change as well. I was on Twitter today, and Twitter is awful for me. My anxiety starts to percolate anytime I go on there. I can't keep up, but people be trying to have these insightful, thoughtful conversations in, like, what is it, like 120 characters, 200 characters, something like that, man. I don't know, but you can't have it. You need to have these long form type of conversations if we expect any type of change to take place. Because if you say, yeah, I agree, or you a sucker or something like that, that's not really giving me anything to really learn from, right? Or to think deeply about, right? I might think like, hey, I'm a sucker. All right, no. But if you give me some reasoning as to why I might be a sucker, might get punched in your mouth. But again, I'm too pretty to fight. But at least I might sit and think about it. Just like my homegirl did. She gave me this question. Are community anti-violent events antiquated? And I don't think I've responded to her yet. right? I don't think I've responded to her yet because now at this stage of the game, I'm trying to sit with things, right? I'm trying to sit with things for a period of time instead of just emotionally reacting. I'm a Scorpio, so we just come off the cuff with with our responses, right? But I wanted to sit with it. I wanted to think about the pros and the cons. I wanted to do a real analysis because I didn't want to do a disservice to anybody out here attempting to do the work. But I didn't also I didn't want to excoriate them for the work that they're doing. I really wanted to just sit with it, and I owed it to myself, right? We owe it to ourselves to sit in deep thought about things that are taking place in our lives, whether it's personally or without in a community. And so me sitting there, thinking about it, I came to this conclusion. Yes and no, right? I'm straddling the fence with this idea of is our community anti-violent events to combat gun violence specifically antiquated? And so I started writing out the yeses, right? Why do I think that, why, first start with no, right? Why they aren't antiquated. And so I was like, you know what? It's better to have, what did I say? It's better to have and nothing comes from it than not have, which effectively puts the kibosh on any positive results that could potentially come from it, right? And so it's this idea, and I think in my philosophy class when I went to CCP for that one semester, or 2 semesters rather, that we were talking about God in this context. Is it better to believe and be wrong, or is it better to not believe and be wrong? Right? And so I took a step back and I'm like, yeah, it's probably better to believe, right? Because all of the benefits that come with believing, when we talk about a higher power, we're talking about some semblance of peace, right? For those who might not be able to have it if they don't believe. And you might get to the other side and you may be right or wrong. And I equate that to this because if you don't have it, you won't know what the benefits could potentially be. Right? If we don't have these events, we don't know if it's going to be the young person who's predisposed for whatever reason to pick up a gun, who may think otherwise. So again, we're talking about that vulnerable population who might show up, even though in reality we know that they don't show up. But I'll get into that when we talk about yes, it is antiquated. When we're talking about it happening specifically within the community, it's improving the morale for residents who do participate. Right? It's like we belong, we're here, we're in this together. And again, as often as I talk about this idea of belongingness, as human beings, we're supposed to interact with one another, especially where we are today. Now, if we go back to the times of Cro-Magnon man and all of that, they might just be walking around with a club just doing their own thing. But where we are together today in society, we're supposed to interact with and engage with one another because we know it's a myriad of benefits that come from that. And so if we're talking about a community, just that act and the idea of a community coming together for a cause is a good thing, right? If only it improves morale. Also, let's see. So it's the recognition and the recognition that we know that gun violence in particular doesn't just there's so many underlying issues as to why gun violence occurs. And so if we're talking about having these community events where we're educating the community, because we can't take for granted that people know, right? Folk who live in poverty don't necessarily know. I'm not going to say they don't know that they live in poverty, but they may not recognize that as being a contributing factor to things like gun violence. And so if we're bringing this educational piece to these events, informing the community, this may have them more aware, more diligent in their efforts when engaging with specifically young people and young black men who are most at risk of gun violence. This may change how they engage with them. They may be able to take this information, this knowledge from this event and take it back to the people with whom is most impacted. And so, that gets to my last point, that it is necessary if it's a part of a larger strategic plan. And so we saw in Oakland, and now listen, Oakland in 21, they getting it popping. And doing research for this conversation, because I was familiar with Oakland's gun violence reduction strategy, just in passing over the last few years. There's been a 77% increase from last year to this year when we talk about gun violence in Oakland. Why? Because folk back outside, right? That cabin fever. So we back out here and we are getting it popping. And so what they did in Oakland, for 5 consecutive years, there was a reduction in fatal and non-fatal shootings, right? And this reaching its second lowest level in 2017. And you see so many communities across the country adopting this model that Oakland implemented to attempt to reduce gun violence in their respective communities. And so the pillars of that was that it was data-driven, it was direct and respectful communication with community members, which we know is important. There was a community of support. So we're talking about connection to services, supports, and opportunities. And then there was focused, targeted law enforcement. And so they weren't necessarily just pulling people over for no reason, harassing black folk for no reason, even though we know they were still harassing black folk for no reason. Right? Because that's just the game. That's just what police do. It's just inherent to who they are and who they've been. And so within this strategy, of course they were having community events to engage the public, to engage the community. You need community buy-in if you expect to see success. Now, it can't only be community buy-in. There also has to be some other things taken into account, right? But again, it's not necessarily the most effective, if we're being honest, when we talk about having these community events without anything else. Taking us to, yes, it is antiquated. So my first point was, those committing these acts aren't the individuals participating in these events. They aren't coming. They may come after they've been to jail and they've gotten out, and now they want to change their lives and they want to impact the community in a positive way. That's when they show up. But the individual, the individuals who were in West Philly, I think, what was it, 60th in Chestnut, where it was 100 shots fired and 2 young men were killed. They not coming to those events. I look at Power 99, the radio station here in Philly, who do the Peace in the Streets. It's just a concert. It's just a concert. Now, yes, young people come out, and for that 1 hour, that 2 hours that they're having that event, no gun violence is taking place, or minimal violence is taking place. But that's not necessarily a strategy to curb gun violence. Because if it was, we would see a reduction here in Philadelphia. However, we're on track to have one of the most deadliest and violent years in recent history. When we talk about community engagement, I follow some I'll say dope. I hate saying dope politicians in the same sentence, right? But they seem like cool people. A politician is still a politician, right? We got to know who they are, but they seem like people who mean well. And I've seen some of the events that they've had. The turnout was, I'm sure if we catch them in a moment of honesty, they would say that the turnout was disappointing. They're not coming out in droves when we talk about the community. Hundreds and thousands of people in these at-risk neighborhoods coming out to have conversation, to learn. Now they're coming in the aftermath of these traumatic events that's taking place so we can release balloons in the honor of. Which is disheartening, right? Because it's like, how can we be preventative? But we're human beings, right? And we know where we are in society now. And I hate to, paint it all with the broad brush. But unfortunately, we only care until it happens to us, until it's literally at our front door, like Jill Scott. Otherwise, it's out of sight, out of mind. Listen, I'm guilty of that too, right? Because I could have easily been at these events, even though it's not taking place in my community. I'm still a part of the community when we talk about black folk. And so lastly, although noble, the efforts aren't necessarily consistent nor part of a larger strategic plan. That's one thing that we talk about the Black Panthers, and we talk about the Young Lords, and we talk about these groups in the 70s, in the 60s, the Nation of Islam, folk within the Civil Rights Movement. We knew that it was a part of a larger plan. We talk about the Black Panthers and what was it, 10 points? The 10-point plan? I believe it was 10 points. Correct me if I'm wrong. But we knew what the agenda was. And again, it's a lot of groups out here that aren't politically affiliated. And when I say politically affiliated, we're talking about where it's led by a politician who do have strategic plans. But then I see it's just them. I don't see the politicians backing them as much. It's just like, here, we're doing our own thing. Right now, we got this event coming up. We not necessarily be connecting with this organization. They might be a little too radical. Right. I remember I had the good sister Joanna McClinton on, and she said, she was open and transparent. Listen, the majority of what politicians do is fundraise, man. We got to get this money. And so we can't necessarily be everywhere, because we know in order to be a part of politics and to be viable, you got to get the change, Jay. And so you can't necessarily be a part of the I believe Black Radical Collective in different organizations who are running straight to the city hall and saying F your couch in a Rick James voice. You can't necessarily be a part of that. Because imagine if they could be. Imagine if they were. How strong that could be. It's like it's fragmented, right? In research that I did for school and that I've been doing for school, talked about the city of Philadelphia's budget and how they've allocated millions of dollars to different initiatives related to wellness, right, and anti-violence. So you're gonna get 20,000 going to this place. You're gonna get 30,000 going to that place. You might get 1 million going to that place. Fragmented. It's much like I talk about with just a lot of organizations who are doing the same thing. Are they coming together? Why aren't they coming together? Because if you got two people here, 2 people there, coming together, that's 4. There's strength in numbers. But everybody want to be Jordan. Nobody want to be James. Everybody can't be the CEO, the founder. We need the secretary. Right? We need the treasurer. We need the vice president. We need just basic members. And I think what's being pushed in society, you heard me talk about it before, is this idea of black excellence and what that looks like. It means being the boss, being the lead. But we make fun of people who follow, right? You don't want to be a follower. Not recognizing that a follower is an integral part of what's taking place when we talk about this idea of change. So I posed this question on social media. Matter of fact, let me see what y'all saying on Facebook and YouTube. Marla says, in the case of Philly, is it safe to bring the community out again when it was a free community event that got shut up? Do we risk setting a stage for more violence if we don't know the root cause? It's a good question, right? Are we putting community members at risk by having these events in high risk areas? But are we not at risk anyway? Just walking down the street. Does it make it more of an easy target when it's a high volume locale? Especially if we're in areas where we say, listen, we don't want the police to come. This is about us. We don't need any type of security. I think this is what makes, and again, I'm critical of this group. That's what makes the FOI such a intriguing idea in group, just in history. They were like, nah, we're going to protect you. We don't care who it is. We don't care if you Muslim or if you just somebody who's trying to do something for the community. We're going to hold you down. We don't necessarily have that, right? That community protection. But it's a good point. Kylie says, New York just signed a crime bill that's worth watching. I did see that, but I'm not sure what it is specifically, so I can't necessarily speak to it. Marla says, and so much of the fragmented costs go to administrative costs. Many of those doing the work, these funds never seem to trickle down to them. Again, because we're talking about these systems, right? We're talking about these bureaucracies within these organizations that take place. And so if it starts out with $1,000 here, by the time we get to the on the boots people, the people on the ground, it might be $75. And they're still expected to perform, which they do. Right? I don't want anybody to think that I'm taking a shot at grassroots organizations or efforts to engage the community. By no means am I. Because even if you're just doing it to do it, again, we're talking about just the morale of those who show up. That's important, right? Kylie says, I was a witness to a double murder at 12. The event at the time made me feel safety at that moment just to see others care. Whew, I know that's heavy, right? I can only imagine, what that was like, that type of trauma, and having to cope with that and to try and deal with that. And I do got the Zoom open. You know what I mean? I think I finally figured out a way to be able to get people into the Zoom conversation. So feel free to come through if you see that on your screen, and we could come and join the conversation. But as I said, I posed this question on Instagram, and I saw a lot of feedback. I don't use my Instagram for the right reasons, or not necessarily the right reasons. The reason that they say you're supposed to use it for, to show pictures. I think I saw an article about Facebook now turning towards being a marketplace and focusing on video content and not necessarily pictures, which I can see that taking place. But I use it just to see what the people talking about. So some of the comments were, without going too deep, I think so, saying that yes, this is antiquated. Who are the people coming to these events? The ones who are doing the violence are the ones who want the violence to end. Exactly. Right? Exactly. Who's showing up to these events is always the question. Are they marketing it to these individuals? How do you market it to the individuals who are most susceptible to participate in gun violence? Are they taking these initiatives to the school setting? Because we know that's where the next group of shooters and killers are located. They're in kindergarten, first grade, third grade, seventh grade, 10th grade, if they get that far. Again, is it part of a larger plan? Another comment was, my first question is, who is we? Some people just want to come together as neighbors to look out for each other as good neighbors. Yeah, for sure. Right? For sure. Some people just want to come together and commune because they recognize what's taking place and they just want to make sure everybody's okay. That's cool. That's always a starting point. But if we're talking about initiatives and events specifically related to curbing gun violence, yes, that's a start. Because you got to have people, you know what I mean, that have that type of mindset. But what's next? What's next? Again, are we just posting it on social media for people to come? Or are we going to probation officers? Because we know teenagers are on probation for violent acts. And saying, hey, we have this event coming up. I don't know if you can make this mandatory for your peoples to attend. I'm not in that world anymore, so I don't know the protocol. But how can we get these individuals here? I'm sure they got to do community service. And so maybe coming to these events, being a part of these conversations, could be ways to engage those who are involved in these type of behaviors. Somebody said it depends on the extent of the event. Are we gathering data from the stakeholders at these events that will be used in policy reform and or economic relief? Or are these events being used to delay meaningful reform, victim blaming, and political clout? Wholeheartedly agree. Wholeheartedly agree. Right? What's taking place there? Is it just a feel-good event? Again, if it's just a feel-good event, there's nothing wrong with that. But there's a limit, and it might not necessarily help reach that overarching goal. Or you come in and say, hey, what's taking place in your community? What's taking place in your family? We need you to be a part of this. Yes, we know the politicians are supposed to be representative of the community, but again, we often question, are they representing the community? I think the current crop here in Philadelphia have made, how can I put this? They're well-intentioned, but the mark is always missed. It's just the nature of politics, right? Let's see. Shout out to Todd, tuned in. Justin Pace says, what community? The black community is forever divided. We have never healed properly from slavery and dominator culture. How do we expect to be the model minorities when generational curses plague us? I think that's an interesting point, right? I think in a moment of clarity and honesty and transparency, I think, well, if you ask every black person, do they want gun violence to end or to be curbed? They'll say yes. And this is not only those who aren't engaged, but the shooters as well. We talking about the shooters as well. And yes, we're talking about his historical impact of trauma that influenced how so many are showing up today. And so I don't know if you missed when I was talking about the Oakland reduction strategy, reduction model. That was part of it. How can we connect you to these services that'll help you be able to process things like historical trauma, present day trauma? Are we connected to the schools? Listen, Philly about to go back to school in September, man. Kids are going to be walking in with the asbestos. Right? They're going to be walking right into asbestos again 2 years later. And so all these parts are interrelated. And so when we talk about needing a strategic plan to curb gun violence, asbestos is part of that. And if you need me to make the connection for you, I will at a later date. But we talk about the environments that our children are going into that aren't conducive to learning, that aren't conducive to progress, that aren't conducive to our health. And so I don't even necessarily know if we're talking about divided. I think we all want the same thing. But who's gonna relinquish control? Who are the leaders that we're relinquishing control to, that we're supposed to follow? Listen, I have the privilege of being a part of various communities. I can navigate various spaces. It reminds me of a conversation I was having about David Makes Man. I don't know if you watched that show on OWN. And David, he's an interesting character, right? But he grew up in the projects. He's able to navigate that environment. He's good in every hood. But he's also intelligent, and he's able to go in these white spaces and being able to successfully navigate. And often what I see, I follow folk from the quote-unquote hood. And I follow the scholars. A lot of times it's some of the same conversations that are taking place. But they're not taking place with one another. And so the elite mingle with the elite, giving the illusion that they still touching the street. Because they might do this here and they might do this there. That's why I thought it was so, and I always talk about Cousin Jeff from BET Rhapsody. That's how I know him, Cousin Jeff, right? He used to come down with Big Tigger, have these poignant conversations. I saw him speak here in Philly, and he talked about the next political group, right? And how they need to be taking these youngsters who are 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, taking them, stashing them somewhere for a couple years, are at-risk kids, because again, they got a skill, right? To be able to engage in violence and other unhealthy areas, that takes a skill. It's a marketable skill. If you got to think about how to get your ops, that's your planning and strategy. They pay people for that in government, right? Stashing them away for a couple years and then letting them run for office in these different places. So not only do they have this ability, this skill set that's been honed throughout their lives due to poverty, due to circumstance, but now they have this intellect and this awareness on this side that could potentially, when put together, could benefit those that look like them, right? Carly says our frustrations stem from our inability to organize. There's a deficiency in strategy, skill set, and we're fragmented. and will forever be fragmented. And that's why I'm not necessarily the most optimistic person when it comes to a lot of things. Why? Because we have technology. Unless it's something, a tragedy that's beyond drastic. We saw that with George Floyd. Like, people think that shifted the pendulum all the way. No, it made it come up a little bit, right? But what happens? Goes back down. Because we got to be back to real life. We got to be able to make a living. Tupac in the poem, well, not necessarily, well, it was the poem that Kendrick did on Mortal Man. And then Pac was talking about it. Right now, we know that they merged those two together. But he said, they take the heart and soul of a 30-year-old. That's why you don't see no loudmouth 30-year-olds. I know I mixed that up, but because why? Because you gotta pay bills. You got a family. You got reputation. You got image. You can't necessarily be out there in the streets like a 19-year-old and a 20-year-old. You got stuff to lose. And I think until we get to this point where it's just like what's being lost is us. And we acknowledge and recognize that. And then we have something to some type of safety net to fall on. Because how you going to get people truly out here being about the work, truly being about the work, if they're not sure, if they can't take off work? Who's going to help supplement that income when they got kids to feed? When they got to feed themselves and house themselves and clothe themselves? Oh, no doubt, Justin. Thanks for tuning in. Shout out to Ty. He working in school buildings, man. You know what I mean? He working in school buildings. But, so he knows firsthand about the asbestos in the schools. Right? It's an unfortunate part. And again, we not necessarily showing up for our kids in that way. Pre-pandemic, I remember seeing, Fox 29 after schools, and I see parents still taking their kids to school. Why? Because I got to get to work. Because what's going to happen is if so-and-so not eating, they going to call DHS. If I got to go to a shelter, the shelter might be overcrowded, or they might call DHS because I got a lack of housing. These quality of life issues. So he got to go to the asbestos school. Because who else going to support us? Who else going to assist us? Carly says there's a cross-section of mental health, of emotional intelligence, and leadership, and that skill set is missing due to unhealed trauma in 99.9%. I, again, agree. Right? And that goes to the question that I asked, a statement that I made on Facebook, where we look at healing trauma as just this individual proposition, this individual act. Especially when we're talking in terms of generational trauma, right? Like by healing me, that's going to do something for those that come after me. That's not necessarily true, right? We talk about the intersection of all of these things. Race, ethnicity, class, trauma. That's so much that impacts this healing that needs to take place. I know it's cliche and it sounds good on the meme or on the t-shirt. Do I believe in harm reduction? For sure. Going to therapy is a part of harm reduction. But that doesn't end generational trauma. Justin Page says, but haven't white men created the evil blueprint that is more rewarding to reinscribe to the patriarchal paradigm of domination by any means, and black people romanticize that very system? Indeed. I thought you probably thought I was going to give you something more profound than indeed. We do. right? I made a post on, and again, like I said, I'm not necessarily the Twitter person. I tweeted out earlier, like an hour ago, about black social workers. How they continue to fund the National Association of Social Workers via being a member or participating in their events. But in the next breath, talk about anti-racist work that needs to be done. And as critical as I am about Jay-Z, he asked Nas such a poignant question. He said, is it Uchiwali or is it One Mic? Is it Black Girl Lost or is it Shorty You Owe Me for Ice? Which one is it? Now, for some, it's just a vote for ignorance. You don't know. You've been indoctrinated into this system. So many of these systems I look at, we look at schooling. We're just preparing the next generation of workers. That's really all it is. It's not necessarily about thinking critically. You'll have some outliers who do it, but even the outliers in this idea of critical thinking, they're still a part of this system. Me, myself, and I, still a part of this system. So as much as I can critique black folk who are funding the NASW, I'm still going to a predominantly white institution to get a doctoral degree because that's what the system says you got to do to be able to get in certain spaces. And so we all participate in it. We all perpetuate it. But how can we minimize that? How can we minimize our role in white supremacy and capitalism and patriarchy and misogynoir and misandry noir? That's truly the question. I don't know, you had to expound on that, Kylie. I've managed to do it from jail. And I definitely appreciate y'all tuning in. And so, when I let me see if there's more comments on social media, or on Instagram rather. Is the community violence fueled simply by individual violence, or is it fueled by systemic violence which influences the individual? He says the latter, and this is from a white man. And listen, again, I think it's, a combination, right? Because I do believe there's a such thing as personal choice. But if the stresses and the pressures are on your neck as such, and the environment is conducive for you to respond this way, then why wouldn't you? Somebody else says the ones we are currently having aren't working. They aren't meaningful or consistent enough. They are one and done until the next one and done. And this is the community talking. Right? And I think that's important to remember, that this is the community part talking. The same people who you would want to show up to these events. We all, ultimately I think it's a matter of all finding out our individual role. First, identifying what it is that we want. If we're talking about this idea of black liberation, which for me includes a reduction in gun violence, right? We have this overarching goal. And then we start to look at the objectives and the actions that need us to get us to this point. We look at our individual role in this process. So for me, it's being able to have these conversations and ask people to think critically. It's me going specifically into these black spaces and discussing the idea of harm reduction, which is going to therapy, doing some other necessary work internally, which will benefit the collective. But we have to first know our ledge, right? Everybody not built for certain things. But you have to take the time, and as I started this conversation with, you got to sit with it. But even that's a luxury. I have the luxury of time to be able to sit with things that are taking place in the community, or questions that I'm posed. That's a luxury. I'm not working back-to-back shifts and having to come home and go to sleep and wake back up. It's luxury. And so this is where we talk about how all of these things intersect. Right? Let's see if I'm missing any comments. It says, what is that? I measure by if a rally has ever made someone say, I'm not going to carry a gun no more. When I was in the streets, none of us even went to the rally. So who are they even speaking to at them? Again, I think I talked about that point. Who's being talked to? I see the initiatives to try and give folk jobs. Hey. Okay. All right. I understand that, I think. Right? But if I'm getting an $8 to $10 job, $8 to $10 an hour job, when I could be out here in these streets, I could be out here collecting a check. My time is my time. Yeah, I might not necessarily have to worry about my safety. Right? But if I don't value myself, if I don't value others, why would I give a damn about the safety of going to a job every day and staying out the way? If I don't value self, why would I? I might as well choose that other path. Even if I have example after example of where it's going to lead me. I could have this sort of cognitive dissonance. Where it's them, not me. Marla says it will forever be challenging to remedy traumas of community where you are both outsider and out of touch. Politicians can't do this with their events. I didn't see one mention of grief counselors. Word. Who's coming to these events? What are you bringing? I know this is now probably about 4 to 5 years ago. I was a part of a Black Lives Matter event. They asked myself and if I knew any other clinicians to come to a healing space that they was having in North Philly. And that was an advanced type of thinking, right? That was a solution-based type of thinking, because it's like, okay, if it's a healing space, what do we need in a healing space? We need people to be able to have these types of conversations, to whether it's talk about coping strategies, whether it's bringing some people out to do yoga, teach people how to decompress. If we're engaging in the arts, I think it was somebody playing like a guitar and people singing, having libations. How are we having events without the people, without the healers? And I don't necessarily mean formal therapists. You got healers of so many different kinds that exist out here. It's a good point. Listen, I don't want to belabor this. So, and I don't know if Keaton's still on. You know what I'm saying? But definitely go check out his show if he is indeed having it tonight. Keaton Nichols, KeatonNichols, and you could just search for him on Facebook. Again, dope brother. Definitely been doing the radio thing way longer than me. He's equally as dope, and so I'll forever champion him. Because again, we need to have these conversations. I know I had said I was going to touch on whether the Olympics should be held in Tokyo, given the fact that no fans can attend the events due to COVID. It's probably about to be a lockdown. I thought I saw somewhere on Twitter that they said 7% of the population is vaccinated. Whew. I don't know if that's true, so don't quote me. But should they have the Olympics? No. And so I may or may not be back tomorrow, man. Listen, I appreciate you all coming through. If you're just catching this on a replay, make sure you hit the share button so folk can be a part of this conversation, because I think it's necessary. I think it's a needed, necessary and needed. Probably the same thing, saying the same thing like a synonym. But I appreciate everybody for tuning in. I might be back tomorrow. I might do a 4 out of 5. We just gonna have to see. Until next time, peace.